let's talk about your activism, because you have been extremely concerned about environmental degradation in the patch of earth that you now call home. Do you think that as a writer you have some kind of obligation? I'm sorry, people ask me this all the time and I absolutely hate it, so I'm passing the question on to somebody else. Do you have some kind of obligation to speak out for?
You do. Oh God, okay. I hope everyone here loves me already. Are we okay? I'm going to now confess something that I wake up every single morning and I say, bidden or unbidden, I'm here to do God's work, which I don't believe, it's awkward because I went to Arundel and I got forced through hours of bloody, anyone else, Sunday school, and that horrible nylon dress, usually hungover. Completely...
Sorry, before you go any further, may I say that I asked people on Facebook who were not able to come here to send messages to Alexandra Fuller. One of them is from your former teachers at Arundel. So please be very careful what you want to say.
Yeah, when we had that drought in 87 and the dam dried up, they found all my wine bottles at the bottom of the dam at the end of the school. It cured me of God. But I do think that you have a moral responsibility. If you have a voice, what is your moral responsibility, even of walking free on the streets? What is your moral responsibility as a storyteller? Because in a way, you have this unusual, rare opportunity to go to people, usually in very difficult circumstances, at least as a non-fiction writer, and say, what has happened to you and how do I tell your story? And, Bryant Breitenbach, the great South African poet, writes about being incarcerated in Pretoria Central for 7 years, 2 of those years in solitary confinement. And he was in the hanging jail. And roughly once every 3 days, someone was hanged for their opposition to apartheid. And everyone was in solitary confinement. So they couldn't talk to one another, but they could sing to one another. The desire to communicate your story, I think, is so overwhelming. And Breitenbach talks about how the hanging chamber was really central to the prison, that you could hear the trapdoor open, you could hear the report as someone was hanged, then of course you could hear the coffins being put together in the workshop. And he also talks about how at night all the men would sing together, but the night before a condemned man was due to be hanged, only he would sing. And how then you could feel the quality of the listening change in the prison as everyone strained to hear the last words of that condemned man. Now, for me, that's the job as the storyteller, that we must tell the stories of people who are generally voiceless, whether they are oppressors or the oppressed, or whether they are, in the case of the oil workers, some kind of puppet for power. You have a tremendous responsibility. Now, whether or not I live up to that, is another conversation. And up for debate, because I think sometimes that can be, people can be very offended.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about voicelessness and agency, because I think we do talk a lot about voicelessness and powerlessness, but we very rarely talk about agency and how even the poorest people have their own agency. Right. And I'm thinking in particular of our fellow Zimbabwean writer who's not here, Peter Godwin. His last book, The Fear. I found it extremely troubling. I had the embarrassment, if I may call it that, of being asked to launch it at the South Bank Centre in London. And I agreed before I'd read it. And then having read it, I deeply regretted it, because you're launching a writer's book. You know how much work he's put into it. You don't want to slam it in front of his fans and audience. But at the same time, I was deeply, deeply disappointed by that book. And it made me ask the question that I'm going to ask you later: who exactly is Peter Godwin's audience? I mean, just as a very basic thing, every single Shona word in that book is wrong. Every single one, including maps, the names on a map. Chivu is spelled wrong. Dandaro, a place in Borodale, is spelled wrong. Even names of political victims are spelled wrong. So I pointed this out to him and his editor. And he was very cross because he thought this had been done. So I pointed out to him and I gave him a whole list of the words that had been misspelled. But more fundamentally, sorry, I'm going to go on a bit. More fundamentally, there was a very disturbing passage where he goes up to a man who's been tortured. Right? This man is lying in a hospital bed. He's been tortured. And he asks him where he has been hurt. Right? And then he says, was it your penis? And then he says, was it your testicles? But presumably to show his authenticity as a Zimbabwean, he puts the penis and the testicles in Shona. This is the first time, as a Shona reader, that I had ever come across those terms written down in Shona. We don't say those words. There are other ways of talking about testicles and penises without actually using the M word and the other M word. It was like a visceral shock. And I tried to imagine the man in the bed who's been tortured, and then suddenly he's being asked in this incredibly intimate way, using a word that even his wife, his partner, would not use about his testicles and his penis. And it got me thinking a lot about what we mean when we say we are giving voice to the voiceless. Are we really giving voice to the voiceless? Or are we giving voice to our own interpretation of what we think the voiceless have to say? Sorry for that long intro, Alexandra.
I think that is a really incredibly sensitive position to be in. And I do think that the work of the writer comes before you do the interview, before you reach, quote unquote, the voiceless. Because there's a wonderful quote that says, there is truly no one who is voiceless. You cut out a person's tongue, they will speak with their eyes. You blind them, they will speak with their fingers. You chop off their limbs, they will find a way to communicate. And I think that there is a tremendous responsibility. Usually it requires death of the ego.
Yes.
In the most fundamental way. And it's a lot easier said than done, because I think when you think you've killed your ego and you're like, yay, you have a funeral and a big wake and you invite all your friends, and damn, another ego grows up in that place saying, oh, I am the ego of the person who killed the ego of, it is this, the Ngozi of ego will come and find you. And, I think that is something, for me, I work anonymously so much, no one knows who I am, really. I mean, I come to Zimbabwe, I expect no one...
I think they do.
Or you. But, they don't really know who I am, and who I am is completely irrelevant in the... And I will surprise and offend people if they think they know who I am. They think and know who I am because they read Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Night, and they love that, so then they love me. But then they read Scribbling the Cat, they hate that, then they hate me. My children, actually their favorite thing to do is to go, when I'm being horrible to them, which is all the time, they love to go upstairs to the computer and look on Amazon at the reviews of Scribbling the Cat. And they go, this person hated you so much, they would give you no stars, but it's not... Yeah, if you'd want to have no ego, just have 3 children, little bastards. And the other thing they threaten to do is take videotapes of me doing Pilates, which I've taken up, and it looks like some sort of biological event is happening. And that was bad enough, but my parents took me on holiday to the Bahamas. My father was looking for his misspent youth. So we were looking under every coconut tree for my father's misspent youth. And I thought, well, I'm not just going to drink rum punches on this holiday. I'm going to do sit-ups. So I'm under the bloody palm tree doing my Pilates exercise, and my parents are looking over the balcony, and my father says to my mother, I think she's having a seizure, you better give her a rum punch. And I think just for me coming home, whether to Zimbabwe or Zambia, and to be reminded, you are not the voice, you're a tiny voice. And how dare you how dare you say you interpret us? You can say, I mean, if you are even the most wide open as you can be, you are still just the vessel at very best, at very, very best.
I had this, now I'm telling you something that I
probably... Can I get a glass of white wine on a rather more urgent note? Before?
White...
Stu, man, get me a glass of wine.
White wine, please. Make it 2. You know, while we're waiting for your white wine, let me tell you. I'm going to tell you
He's
something.
my neighbor growing up. He taught me how to smoke.
I'm going to tell you something that
Am I
happened
allowed
to
to
me.
smoke up here while I'm at it? Can I just... Do you want to talk?
You're not allowed to smoke up here. You can smoke up there, down there in the cheap seats, but not up here.
Oh.
No, I was going to tell you something that happened when the paperback edition of my book came out. It had this term that some journalists had used to describe me, which I found very disturbing: voice of Zimbabwe. Petina Gappah is the voice of Zimbabwe. And I've always pointed out
loud.
that, but the Voice of Zimbabwe is actually a radio station, and but also, I mean, more seriously, I find it extremely disturbing to be the representative of the people. The people speak through this voice. It is extremely offensive. I don't speak for all Zimbabweans. I speak maybe for some Zimbabweans, but not for others. Zimbabwe is a contested space. We can't get away from that. It's a contested space. So there is no one truth about Zimbabwe that is spoken by one person. So when this thing came out on the paperback of my, they'd printed what, 10,000 copies? They had to pulp them because I couldn't go around the world touring with a book with something that I felt I couldn't defend. Because I think it's so important to emphasize this, and I'm so glad you're here to emphasize this, that Zimbabwe has many voices, Africa has many voices, the world has many voices. Together, the more of us that are writing, we then present a true tapestry, but there is no one voice.
When Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight first came out, I would get, it says an African childhood, thank you. Water as well, that's just in case I fall over. Can I get both?
The 2 glasses of water.
Thank you. No, one's water. They would say, there would usually be someone in the back, some, American African studies person who go, how can you claim to be the whole voice of Africa? And I would say, well, to be fair to me, my publisher couldn't fit in a Rhodesian/Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambian childhood. So they just went with the African. And, but I would get very irate because people would say, how can you call yourself African? You're white, you're black. And I was like I didn't notice. Clearly, I got sunburned. And
do you call yourself African?
No.
It's a question I get all the time.
Yeah. Really, how obscene to call yourself after an entire continent.
Yeah.
And so, at any rate, and then I took on for me, it's fundamentally about voice. And so when I began to write about the place that I was living in now, Wyoming, I've lived there for 20 years. I lived in Southern Africa for 24 years. So, it's becoming a fairly even balance. And somebody was from the BBC, Owen Bennett-Jones, was interviewing the peace activist Cindy Sheehan, who had lost her son,
in the
thank
Iraqi
you,
war, yeah.
Casey Sheehan, in the Iraq War. And so she had camped out in front of George W. Bush's ranch house in Texas and was causing a big fuss and saying, hey, why did he die? Just tell me why he died. I don't mind that he died, but you need to give me a good reason. Was it for weapons of mass destruction or oil? Tell me one or the other. And so she was very controversial for a while. So Owen Bennett-Jones said, you're causing all this fuss and you're really distressing the president, and do you call yourself a patriot? And she said, no, I call myself a matriot. And Owen Bennett-Jones was so shocked, he squeaked. And she said, I don't consider the children of the United States or the children of Iraq or the children of Afghanistan or the children of South America or the children of, wherever, any more important than the children of anywhere else. And I said, that's it. That is it for me. I'm not a patriot, I'm a matriot. The children of all countries are born equal. It is an absolute accident of geography and biology, what color you are born, what place you are born, the identity that you absorb. I can never rub out of me, nor would I want to, being a Rhodesian, or being a Zimbabwean, or being a Zambian, or being a Malawian. How would which piece do I lose?
Exactly.
To say, I lose my childhood, there goes my foot. Or I lose who I was as an adolescent, there goes the rest of me, No, the whole place and the whole community raised me, and through different political periods.
Yeah. I want to open the discussion up to the audience because we have about 15 more minutes to go, and I really would like you to get a chance to ask Alexandra any question you want to. But before I do that, I'm just going to ask you this question. Audience, when you write, do you have an audience? Do you have a particular audience?
Yeah.
Do you have a...
Yep.
Is there an ideal reader?
Yep. Yeah. One person.
Is it a particular person?
No, it changes every book.
Ah.
Yeah, you go through men quite quickly. That was a joke.
We think.
No, I mean, I think that it would be... Look, if I thought that I was writing Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight for... I don't know. You can't... I mean, you can't. Because then you would be trying to please too many people. But if you really love and know someone well, and it's like, you know, we all know this. I think that Zimbabweans are like the Irish. We learn to tell stories really well, because if you get boring, everyone's drunk and they will fall in the bloody fire.
Do you know what?
And you'll be responsible.
Sorry, I'm going to be very rude and interrupt you and say somebody read my stories and said, these people could be Irish. I love that.
Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight is a prescribed text amongst O-level students in Ireland. So, you know, I think that we're very competitive, I think, with the way we tell stories. We have to be amusing. If you're not funny, boom, the next person's telling their story. And I think the way that in Zimbabwe humor is used. I went to see Stephen Chifonisa's play, They Buried My Son with Diamonds, at the Harare Park last week. Yeah. It was absolutely fantastic. It takes on everything. Takes on xenophobia, homosexuality, gender issues, corruption in politics, corruption in voting. I don't know how he got it through the censor board. It goes on to, forced relocation. One of the characters says, oh my God, they're going to send me to Gokwe, you know, and all... You're howling with laughter. It's half in Shona, half in English, so I understood half of it. But you are still weeping with laughter, and it sounds like the sound of us. Because we are incredibly funny. We have had nothing but tragedy. And in the face of that, we howl with laughter. I mean, I don't know about you, and maybe, hope this isn't just me. I've never laughed so hard, but at a Zimbabwean funeral. And you don't mean to, but the poor guy is dead, so now you might as well really tell all the stories. And everyone's weeping, and they're weeping with laughter, and there's a sense of enormous... I think our storytelling has to have levity. We have, I think, I always say this about Southern Africans, my mother included, we have a very high emotional metabolism. In other words, bad things happen. Most of us get on with it. Pull your socks up, come on. Because the next tragedy is just behind you, and someone else has just had something much worse happen to you, and you laugh.
You know, one of my favorite things in the Olympics was a whole list of things that would happen if the Olympics were being hosted in Zimbabwe. And my absolute favorite is, have you heard about this goblin that's been stealing underwear in Gokwe? Yeah? No, it's a national sensation. There's a little goblin that, you know, steals women's knickers while they sleep. And, you know, they've been found
That's happened
to me. Off them, yeah. And then they were found in a heap, right, in a pile. And according to the Herald report, not all of the underwear was claimed. Some of it was in a state that it was very difficult to identify. And one of my favorite Olympic thingies was when somebody said, if Zimbabwe hosted the Olympics, the mascot would be the Gokwe Goblin.